Right, okay, so this is I think last week in March, so obviously next month's April, but we've already started the new project, which is looking at textures. So last week I talked a little bit about oils and acrylics, and I thought this week I'd just talk a little bit about watercolours and maybe do a very quick demo. I won't do too long a demo. So that's the sort of theme for this month. The next project after that is really derelict theme, which some of you are starting, and you could combine that with the textures if you wanted. So if you want to do like textures for a landscape, that's fine, but if you wanted to combine it with like a derelict theme, that would be absolutely fine too. So that's that. I just mentioned the last week in April, I'm going to have a 1 week break, and then there's also a week in May that I'm going to have a break, which is on the emails. So if you have a look at that.
You're fed up with us.
Do you ever take holidays?
It's a restfulness.
Yeah. So yeah, I got a 1 week break in April. What else? I think that's. Oh yeah, the other thing is painting holidays. If anybody interested in painting holidays. So I mentioned a bit earlier on in some of the emails and that I'm going to run a little trip to Southwold. So I've got about half a dozen people lined up already, but if anybody else is interested in that, that's on the 26th and 27th of June. Yep, June. And it could be 5 days or just 1 day if you want to come down for the day. So that's that. The other one is Italy. Got a couple of people signed up for this. So we're looking maybe to fly from Southend to Pisa, and then find a nice location from there. So again, if you're interested in that, that would be the 14th of September. So we can start that for as long or short as you want, really. So they're both very flexible holidays. So that's those two if you're interested. Or if you want more information, let me know. But as I say, I've got a couple of people interested in those. Okay, so with the water-based mediums, it's kind of watercolour, or you could use acrylics in a watery sort of way. I'm sort of thinking of using paper. So these are really quite nice little exercises, just trying out different textures. So I'll just talk you through some of them. This is kind of splatter paint. So that could be using something like a toothbrush. Old toothbrushes, they're quite good for sort of splattering a little bit of paint. Or just getting a brush and literally sort of flicking it. So I'll try those in a minute. So that can add, because watercolours can look a bit flat, so sometimes it's quite nice to just try and work some textures in there. So that's that one. This is grating, basically a watercolour wash and then just grating some colour in there. So using something like a pastel and a bit of a knife and just grating a little bit of colour in there while it's wet, and that can add quite interesting textures. So that's most of the ones on that one. On this sheet, no, I've gone to this one. This one's like a palette knife, so basically putting a bit of wash down and then scraping into it. So that's that one. This one is sponging. If you've got natural sponge, that can create some quite nice textures. And this one is a better example. That's quite a nice example of like the natural sponge texture. So basically, if you're painting something like trees and foliage, that can be quite nice. Not making it too regular, but something like that to sort of break up the texture. That was a bit bubble wrap. I've never actually managed to use that anywhere, but if you're going for more of a contemporary look, that could look quite good in sort of abstract. A bit more of the dribbling. This is sort of scratching into the paint. So basically putting a bit of paint down and scratching in. That can be quite good for things like if you're painting grasses and things like that. So that's that one. Any others on that? That's probably most of that one. This one is using like rock salt or natural salt. So like quite crunchy big bits of salt. So basically you put a wash down and then you can splatter a bit of salt on. And it has the effect of sort of sucking all the colour out, sucking the moisture out. So just leaving little sort of textures of colour. This is adding other things. So that was a little bit of cling film. So that might be quite a nice effect if you're painting something like a seascape or something like that. So they're all different ways you can add a little bit of texture in. So obviously you can't use them all on the same painting. But it's quite nice to just have a couple of sheets and just play around sometimes, just experiment, see where you can go with it. I think that, the sort of paintings that appeal to me are ones where, maybe they're reasonably realistic, but they're also quite expressive in the brushwork. You've got lively, interesting mark making brushwork, or palette knife work, whatever you're using. So where the paint's got a liveliness in itself. So that's something, you might want to experiment with. And probably something that I'd quite like to experiment with a bit more.
You say that it's all in watercolour?
These are all watercolour, yeah, it's all watercolour. Some of it, there might be a little bit of pastel in there, or masking fluid, but they're all watercolour. Pop those there. What I think, so with the idea of, the other thing is adding things in, like, you could do a bit of watercolour and then maybe a bit of pastel over the top. So you can get different looks by sort of adding other mediums, either something like that, and kind of soften out the watercolour. So I think they combine quite nicely to me, the watercolour and the pastel together. In terms of the derelict theme, I've got a few different images, things I've taken in the past. So that was some boats. I started a painting of that scene, but basically it just went too dark and I couldn't carry on. So I've got half finished oil painting at home, but I think I might try and finish someday. So I might use that. Perhaps bring that in another week and work that one out. These were the Mansell forts out in the estuary. So a couple of years ago, quite a few artists, basically we hired a boat and had a boat trip out and painted out at sea. So this was great fun painting them. And we also went to Mulberry Harbour and painted the Mulberry Harbour from the sea and bits and pieces. So that's one of the photos I took out there. So these were, you probably know about these were kind of defences during the Second World War. And they were originally all linked with walkways to each other. So it's quite an interesting environment. In terms of painting then, I'll probably start with a big wash. And I've just very quickly sketched out, a rough area just to play around with. So this wouldn't necessarily be a painting, but it's just something to make a study of, really. So with the sky is a bit flat, really, I find on that one. So maybe try and make that a bit more interesting. So if I make up a biggish wash for the sky, and I won't go too close here because it will just bleed everywhere, but it could be something like that, and then just soften that out. So just have that kind of come to there, and perhaps put some slightly darker bits in there, just to make it a bit more interesting. The harbours themselves, I've mixed up a burnt sienna colour, so I was thinking that might be quite good as a basic wash that I could then work into. So I can leave some areas a little bit lighter for these bits. So that could be the start, and then I'm thinking, what could we do? Maybe try other things, like maybe splattering some colour in there, perhaps a slightly stronger mix. So, that could be. Now what you could do is, you could always paint the sky, let that dry, and then mask that off, get some sort of scrap paper and just stick that around there. But that could be, I'm sort of thinking as rust effects, that might be quite interesting to do something a little bit like that. We could try things like palette knives or the edges of credit cards, get some nice sharp lines, either while that's wet or you could let it dry. The main thing is just to sort of have a good play and not worry too much about it, just see where you can go with it. So that's quite nice. And I think these kind of rust effects can be quite nice. Again, these darker bits at the bottom, I've got a dark mix here. Again, I'm thinking that might work quite well with things like the credit cards and the palette knives. And then you've got all these sort of sharp edges coming out. So that could be, again, a bit more of that sort of thing. Trying to think what else we could do. I've got these sponges that might be quite good for just drawing little bits in. Yeah, that's quite nice for a sharpish edge. And then drag that over a little bit just to break up. Let's go back to that tone a little bit. Yeah, so you can see you create some different sort of looks. We're just changing the implements that you're using. So nice fun project. If you fancy it. As I say, don't get too caught up with being too precise. Just experiment a little bit and see where you can go with it.
Lovely.
Okay.
Okay.
Right. Anybody got any questions? All good. Right.